project using different technologies, and so it's yeah, a very heterogeneous kind of project that you want to integrate all together. There is two ways to define yeah, the core of Apache Camel to integrate your project. They are providing a Java DSL and an XML DSL. So it means that for a language server, we might want to have support for both. For several years, there was some tooling which was based on Eclipse. This tooling was mainly graphical, using property views and so on, and there was not a focus on the textual part of the edition. And in the community of Apache Camel, some people were not happy with that. They wanted, a lot of them wanted to use only textual thing directly. They also want to use their preferred IDE for various reasons, sometimes just because as they're working mainly on other kind of project that they need a specific IDE, sometimes because just they prefer another one. And they started a project one year ago. Not working. Okay. And they started it without the language server protocol, and they started it to write it for IntelliJ. So they started an effort which is working only on IntelliJ, binding to all its APIs, so not reusable. And that's why I wanted to push to have the language server protocol, to have it also in the existing old Eclipse tooling and benefit from all the other features. I will just show you what it looks like quickly. So the color are not correctly, but anyway. So here is the graphical way to play with the tooling, and there is a lot of options using properties views. There are debugging and so on. I won't show it. What is important that I want to show is, in fact, that behind that there is an XML file, and in Camel, one part which is really important, where we want to help the user in textual mode, it is this part, what we are calling Camel URI, and in fact, for this URI, there are something like more than 200 possible values at the beginning and after, which is defining the kind of component. And after, you can have, for each of them, you have between 10 and 100 possible parameters that you can provide. So for now, every people were just reading the doc and doing it manually when they want to do it in a textual mode. And this Camel URI is also available in Java. It is the exact same URI that they are using. So here is for the context. So what we wanted is to write our language server one time and to have the support for Apache Camel in a lot of IDEs. There is already all this one declared as supporting it, and there are some others that are coming, some that are not official and so on. So it will really help to have this language server written. So I started to write my server. The first thing is, one of the cool things, it is that you can write in your own language the server part. This is really interesting because I know only Java language, so I can write it in Java. That's very nice. So I started to go on internet and search a bit of examples. And in fact, the most common example that you will find first are all TypeScript, the most documented one. you will finish to find some Java examples. Some of them are based on Eclipse, like GDTLS that you can have, but it means that you have already quite a big language server. It requires quite a lot of bootstrap. Hopefully, you will find LSP4G, LSP for Java. This is the keyword that you will need to search if you want to start to write your application. This is your language server. This is a nice libraries written in Java, which is able to, which lets you write your language server. It is taking care of all the communication process, and you just have all the classes available, and so you will have the completion and the documentation to start writing your language server. I wanted to keep it simple, the language server, to have it a single jar to launch. So for that, in Apache Camel communities, they are praying only for Spring Boot currently, so that's why I choose Spring Boot, but you can choose whatever else. Just make it simple to have a little binaries to start your server. And when you write your server, some more tips is it will be really easier if you can restrict your work on at first time at least on a single file. It means sometimes when you are providing completion based on a language, you will need a lot of files and so on. But in case you can provide it just with a single file, I really recommend to start with that. There is something which is useful to start, which is the text document kind, synchronized kind, which is full. It means that on each request, it will send the full document, so you don't have to manage when starting to store things, to manage to have to store the other files and so on. It was really easy to start with this mode. The last advice in this part is about you have different ways to communicate with the language server. You can use some socket, or you can use system in and system out. You can really use it when starting. We will see after that finally, in fact, you need to, you will usually launch your server on your at the place where the IDE is running, so it will be really easy. There are more help to do that. Just when doing that, as the server is communicating with system in, system out, take care to have nothing written in system.out, especially. So we are thinking about systemout.println, that's obvious, but when you are using some logging mechanism, sometimes it can, depending on the configuration, it can go also to system.out. This is something that we are not used when using Eclipse. It's all configured to go to the log file and so on, but depending on the logging framework, you can have trouble with that. So, okay, with all these little constraints, I started to write my my language server, and I was able to produce my my server with a simple jar. And I started to test it in all, not all, but some of the IDEs that we have. The thing is that all of them are providing some ways to launch it with a launch configuration, to change some preferences, to bind the server, to have it available, consumable inside the IDE. It's just too complex for real users. It's really nice to test it, but when we provided it, we have absolutely no users that were able to do it, or were enough, that wanted to take enough time to do it. So it was just, okay, I have my language server, and I was expecting to have it working with all IDs, so it is, but it requires configuration, and it is not usable by users at this moment. It means that we need to provide a client for each ID that we want. So we are breaking a bit the premise of writing only the server and working everywhere. It means that you need to write the server and also to write a little client on each ID. And it also means that you will need to write it in different languages, because for some of the IDEs are not written in Java, some are in TypeScript, some are in C, Lisp, and so you will have to learn a lot of things. So at this point we said, okay, we need to write some client for the IDE to provide an integration into them. The idea is just to have a very little client which is just launching the server and binding to the correct file. It's not very complex, but it needs to be done for each IDE. So we started with Eclipse Desktop IDE. Why? Because we know it perfectly. And after, I will recommend to use to do it also for VS Code, because the language server protocol is coming from VS Code. It is kind of the de facto reference implementation. When you have an issue, something is not working with your language server, and you can test it in VS Code. You will know if okay, it is a bug or it is not implemented yet in some client or not, or it is just okay, it is a bug in my language server, or it is the reference implementation to test again. We also choose to provide it in Eclipse Che because it is web-based, very important for communication and to convince product management to have something working both in desktop and in web. And also, it is written in Java, so it's not very complicated. But for you, maybe you may choose some different ideas to start with, just depending on your community. If you have all your users using Emacs, just do with Emacs. It's also possible. So first I said that when we were providing the language server only, no users were using it. So after we were providing the IDE client, and in fact we were providing just the binaries and so on, because it is easier to build in some technologies, and it was also a showstopper. We had very few users that were trying to use the binaries, the Eclipse update site, and so on. What we really need to do is to have a marketplace integration of the IDE client, because people are too lazy to find the update site, to have a process to download a binary and install it in their instance of their IDE. What they want is to use their marketplace inside their existing instance, search for Camel, the keyword, and being able to install it. It seems not very complicated at first sight, but in fact it's a bit more, because it means that you will need to create an account on each community to be able to upload some entries on marketplace. It means that you have specific terminology that they are using. They have a specific build every time. So it's not impossible. It just takes a bit of time to read all the doc and yeah, they are using different terminology. It was, yeah, complicated for that mainly. I will go more in details for when you write your client for the Eclipse IDE. For the server part, the keyword is LSP4G. For the client and Eclipse, it is LSP4E, LSP for Eclipse. It is the dependency that you need to use the language server. They are providing a class which is really easy to use to launch your server and to bind the input-output, which is the process stream connection provider. And after, you just need to do the content type association between what they're calling the generic text editor, which is supporting the language server protocol, and your files. Just take care that the language server, by default, all the completion that you will provide with it, for instance, is available only in the generic text editor. So what it means that I'm providing some more advanced completion for XML. When I'm opening the XML editor, at that I don't have the language server completion, all the benefits of it by default. So I needed to reuse the XML editor to provide an extension point. The XML editor is providing extension point for completion, and I needed to bind my language server completion to it to have it available, to have my language server completion inside the XML editor. And why it is the case? It is also because there is no language server for XML, at least with completion for now. We also need to think when you are combining some different language that you are expecting on the same file that different language servers are providing help. This is still a young technology. You don't have language server for all the language. You have for all the trendy one, the JSON, the YAML, and so on, but for all the older one, you might not have the language server. And we discovered it at that time that, in fact, the integration with the existing editor in Eclipse is not done by default. So we provided it, but it is not the case by default. Another thing which is really interesting for starting with Eclipse Desktop is that you can, and using the Java servers, it is that you can easily configure remote debug possibilities. When launching your jar, you just provide the information, and after we are Eclipse plugin developer, we know how to use a remote Java launch debug configuration. It is interesting because we have our IDE, and we are launching the server in another thread. And so to know what is happening on the server side, you will want to put sometimes some breakpoints on the server side when playing with the UI. Another cool thing is that Eclipse is providing the log of all the communication between the two, the server and the client. So really useful to know what is transferred between each of them. The next IDE that we did is VS Code. So the big problem with that is that it is written in TypeScript, and when you have never done a single line of TypeScript or JavaScript in your life, it's not trivial to start with that. There are also one problem, which is that you are not in a Java environment. It means that my Java server, language server, how can I launch it? When I was in Eclipse, okay, I'm in Java environment, I can launch my Java my language server with a Java command, I know that there is Java. But when I'm in VS Code, maybe the user don't have Java because he is in a TypeScript environment. So you need to write some code in TypeScript to check that there is Java and to launch it and so on. So when you are noob in TypeScript, that's not completely trivial. Hopefully, there is the GDTLS, which is doing it. Now there is also the Camel client, so you can have a look. I would recommend to look to get to the Camel client because we remove some part of things from the GDTLS, which is more complex because there are also some Eclipse stuff inside, more things related to OSGI and that you might not need. Another thing is that, for this IDE, we don't know yet how to write a code for the VS Code environment and so on. Not very cool. And a last advice is that, really take care to have nothing written on the standard output. Because with Eclipse, it was working fine. When you are sending a bad request, it was handling it very well. But in VS Code, in case, I don't know, a stack trace is sent to the output, the language server is stopping to respond at all. You will need to restart your VS Code instance to have the language server working again. So you really need to take care that you never write something in standard output without going through the LSP4G API. So the last IDE integration that we did is with Eclipse Che, which the benefits is that Eclipse Che is also part of OpenShift.io, so you have 2 IDE for the price of one. It was quite easy to write. It is in Java. You have the Che developers, which were quite fast to validate it and to help on that. The really big advantage is that you will have a demo on a web-based application, and all product manager will be happy. The downside of that is that it requires a recompilation of the Eclipse Che stack for now. So it means that when you want to test it and develop it, you need to install all the development environment for Eclipse Che, and if you're in Windows, it is not working very well. So you will need to go to Linux if you're on Windows, and it means that your language server needs to be accepted on Eclipse Che. This is not an extension apart. So they accepted ours very quickly. There was no problem, but maybe for some other language it might be more complicated. I don't know. And the last thing is that by default the language server is not activated. You will always need to change some preferences, so it means that user will need to change that unless you are providing what they're calling a specific Che stack, but it is starting to be a bit more complicated, and we didn't went that far. So for this part, for now, it's really nice, at least for a demo part, and to convince product manager and for the vision for the future for the Che stack, but don't expect a lot of users using in Eclipse Che your language server at first. I will talk a bit about the multi-language server. I talked a bit of that before. So yeah, there was, as you have seen, so in our case we have XML and a little attribute on which we want to provide some help to the user. or we have Java and a little attribute on which we want a little parameter of a method on which we want to provide some help. This is not completely trivial. For VS Code, it was working out of the box. For XML, the XML editor of VS Code was working out of the box, so that's nice. In Eclipse, it wasn't the case. We need to add another extension point. In Eclipse Che, there is no XML editor available at all, so it means that you have the completion for your little part for which you provided, but there is no XML language server for now, so it means that you have a pure textual for all the other part of the XML file. It means no completion for your all your tag, XML tags. Not very nice. And so yeah, after there is the question of for Java, we have not done it yet. It will be quite the same. And do we want to plug us to explicitly to GDTLS, which is a Java language server, or do we want to be completely outside of it, and that all the clients are responsible to merge the result? It is quite easy to imagine for completion, for instance, but maybe for formatting, which one will win? This is not completely trivial. We still have some questions on this subject. Maybe you will have to answer them sooner than us if you start your language server. Hopefully for us, we were able to work on a bit with providing extension point in XML by not doing it in Java. At the beginning, we were able to say, okay, we focus on XML first and Java will come after. But maybe for you, it will be more important question to solve. I will show the state, what we have done. So it was we were 2 engineers working on that, half day per week during 7 months. Sometimes we skipped it, sometimes we spent more time, so this is an average. As you can see that it is working on all these IDEs. So I will jump. So you have it. It is, for now, we started mainly with completion. It is, I think, the simple point to start when writing your language server. The easier one to see a value added rapidly. So we can see that you have the completion. The completion with some documentation, and depending on where I am in the URI, I'm able to provide different completion. But what is interesting is that we have written it once, and so it is working inside the XML editor, as you can see. It is working in VS Code. So the same here. What you need to know is that depending, all IDs are not implementing all features the same way, and some are not dealing with it. For instance, in VS Code, we have the type which is available. In Eclipse, we didn't have it. Just a little difference. And there is some navigation available in VS Code, which is not done the same in other IDE. And so, okay. And I think I won't show you in OpenShift.io because it needs to reboot the containers in the cloud. but it will provide the same kind of completion and so on, and it is on the web. Yeah, I already talked about that, about the time and resource management. So it is to give you an idea on how much effort it was to create the language server written in Java, 3 IDE integration, and integration of inside 2 marketplace. We were relying also on communities. All communities working on LSP are quite active, so that's really nice. You can really count on it. And yeah, to summarize it, yeah, a point which is important is that language server protocol is in fact known only in Eclipse and in tooling world. So when you start to talk about it to your product manager, to your team, which is not doing tooling and so on, they are just looking you with big eyes, saying, what are you talking about? It's not possible to do this kind of things. There is no way that all IDs will agree on something common like that, and so on. And so really keep that in mind, because it was really something hard to pass a message. And the key points to commit them was to list all the potential supported IDs. And maybe the biggest one is that when we were able to do the demo in a desktop app, in a desktop IDE and in a web-based IDE, at that time they started to think, okay, this is interesting, we will invest on it in the future. Also, having the marketplace entries, it helps to have some download stats and yeah, to see that, okay, there are some people that are interested in that. So yeah, we were able to do that in few weeks. In fact, a lot of weeks, but with a little time inside each of them. And just also plan a bit of time to bootstrap for all the wanted ID that you want to provide it. Otherwise, it won't be used. Very quickly, because I'm out of time. What's next is we plan to implement more feature of the LSP. So when you start, you can easily implement just a subpart of it and say that your language server is able to handle only completion, for instance. There are also some thought about the multiple language server thing, how we will deal with that with Java, for instance. For the extension, I'm giving you mostly pointers here. There is a debug adapter protocol based on the same principles on language server protocol. There is also a graphical server protocol, which is in discussion. And also the next question that you will have is, okay, it's nice that I have a code edition stuff and debugging, but what about when I'm starting a project? How can I create a new file, a new project? So for that, there is no protocol available yet. But there are some discussion in the language server protocol community. And also, what is a way to provide easily your language server in all IDE to avoid to write the client? Maybe there are some tests to have a Docker image, so you will just deliver your language server as a Docker, and we may ask all clients to implement it, or maybe we can imagine to have a language server marketplace which is supporting maybe few type of servers written in different some languages. Everything is possible. Just we will need to work on that, everybody. If you want more about language server protocol at EclipseCon, there are several talks on the subject, showing it, explaining it, or just having some demo based on it under the cover. And I will be happy to chat with you on the subject, so come chat during the EclipseCon with me. Okay, so now I hope that you will be ready to start writing your language server or to help others to start writing their language server. So thank you for listening. It's time for questions, and you can come to plug. Thank you. Any questions? No? Okay, thank you.